because it started off as a story that was supposed to be kind of an exploration of the interstellar, not just interplanetary, but interstellar nature of war in the Spacer Saga. Because for those of our listeners who may be aware, there was a point at which the Spacer Saga took place across multiple star systems, not just across the many planetary sectors of our solar system, but multiple solar systems, period. Maybe even dozens of them, or even hundreds. And join the core, see the galaxy was at one point a sort of a literal point. Join the core, see the galaxy. It's a sort of a joke on the part of the spacers who say that sort of thing, but it was more literal in terms of the actual meaning of the phrase. Now it's kind of become a very crass sort of tongue-in-cheek metaphor. It's like, yeah, join the core, see the galaxy. You'll see nothing but the inside of the solar system, but you might as well see the galaxy. Kind of the gallows humor that soldiers are want to do. And with join the core, which is what we have been referring to it as, because that's kind of the main gist of it. It's a story of a grunt infantryman. It's a story of a grunt spacer who joins up right at the start of the Frontier Wars, which is one of the major conflicts in Spacer Saga lore, and follows him pretty much through all 10 years of those all 10 years of that conflict from start to finish. Basically from, oh, well, the Alliance just attacked, so they're going to send us to Titan to fight, to, oh, I'm stationed on Titan for a couple of tours. I get sent somewhere else for a couple of tours. And the main thing about the story, I don't know if this distinguishes it, because obviously there's been plenty of stories done this way, but the main thing that distinguishes it for me is that it's told in first person, because it's actually structured when we could if you were reading it right now, you would see this. You open the first page and it says told by Alejandro Alex Rafael Santos and then written by Nick Oakes. So it's kind of a literary device, like the way Tolkien. I know I'm committing the ultimate sin of comparing myself to Tolkien, but Tolkien used the literary device that he was just translating recordings laid down centuries, if not thousands of years earlier by the hobbits and the elves and so on and so forth. And that's kind of what I'm doing with this story. It's basically it's told like a memoir, told which I've done in a couple other stories as well. This is one of the first ones I actually started using this technique. It's a story that's told as if it's a memoir being related from one of the first person accounts of the Spacer Saga lore of the Frontier Wars to a historian or a biographer or a friend or whatever. And he's kind of just telling his story like, hey, I was here, I did this, my friends did this, I watched this guy die, I killed that guy. And it's kind of told from a close yet distant perspective, because he's from a close yet distant first person perspective. What I mean by that is he's telling it like he's there, but 5 minutes ago, even though it might be 50 years ago or 5 years ago,
Oh,
however
yeah.
long.
He's telling a story.
Yeah, he's telling the story. He's telling the story not in the moment, not like I round the corner and see the enemy aiming his rifle at me. There's no ing verbs,
Well,
but there are
it's
lots of,
past tense, first person.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Just it's a
and
much
that's kind
more
of a new
succinct way
thing
of
for
saying.
you. And that's I think that's at least in the work we've done together is that's kind of a new approach for you. That's actually my in my first run of stories, that's how I wrote, right? I would find ways, tricks around third person. I would have like a journal and then a journal running throughout the story, and then I would have a continuous story, right? You'd have like guy A and guy B. You see guy B's story through a journal. You see guy A through first person present
Mhm.
tense, or you know what I mean. And so I'm kind of excited to dig into that aspect of it. And one of the things I like about the four complete stories is they're not telling the entire story of the Frontier Wars, of this latest war on Titan. It's more like, much like Starship Troopers, it goes for it contrasts the propaganda that war it tells young impressionable men, where well, mostly men, now sometimes women, but it's mostly men they sell it to. And because they sell men adventure and excitement and duty and honor and glory and service to your country, all those things are true. And war is a horrific, um soul crushing. It's I was so lucky in my experience that I never had to kill a man.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, a lot of people had to, yeah, and I, that's the way it was. And so,
Watch people die. Watch people they cared about die all the
and
time.
watch people die, um, and be unable to do anything about it, and then carry that guilt with them for the rest of their lives. Something that's really cool about joining the Corps, See the Galaxy, is it starts off with these starry-eyed kids, and they get to the, they get to, they forward deploy out to Titan, and they get there, and they're like, oh, oh, this is hell.
Yeah,
That's where we
this isn't fun.
yeah, this isn't, there's no noble victory here. There's no noble combat. There's just killing.
Yeah.
And it's the worst thing people can do to each other. And, like I said, thank God I don't have any first person experience with that. But it's, I love that aspect of it. I've known enough people who have, and I've seen what it does to them. And I don't blame them, but we're touching on that aspect of it. I think that's really important
Yeah.
that you
And
talk
if
about.
anything, that's one thing that makes it really important to tell it from a first person perspective because it keeps it close to the vest. It keeps it close to the experience. It tells this experience of going through this. It's because that's the thing about war. And again, I'm speaking from the perspective of someone who's never even worn the uniform. So take everything I say with a grain of salt, dear listener. Derwin at least has served. I have not. That we've probably made that much abundantly clear over the episodes we've recorded together. But just from everyone I've ever talked to who's been through the experience, everyone I think I've ever seen and read about people who've been through the experience and witnessed it firsthand or talked to people secondhand or whatever, it's not a good thing. It really is the worst thing we can do to each other. And it's not just that it's violent, it's that it's often so just banal and soul crushing, like you said, where, it's hurry up and wait, where you may be, 5 or 10% of the time out there screaming and firing, blazing away, trying to survive. The other 90 to 95% of the time, you're just sort of sitting around hoping that a rocket doesn't get dropped on your head or you don't like step on a mine or just bored to tears watching the hours tick by and trying to like just go through your duties like filling the sandbags and then emptying sandbags and filling them up again because why not? Just there's monotony and
Yeah.
interspersed with the monotony is terror, and that's the thing that makes it so crazy is you don't know whether a moment's going to be crazy or monotonous, and it's kind of a guessing game. And that's kind of what these characters are going through. It's kind of what the main character. That's really what the main character is going through. Is he's learning, like you said, that oh, this big adventure that I was thinking I was going to have is a bunch of bullshit. It's all a house of cards, and when the house of cards comes tumbling down, real people are dying on both
And,
sides. But especially the side that I care about, the character cares about, that is, which is the people that he knows and like works with and lives with every day, gets to know, face to face.
and in the current draft we have, it opens with his father, who was a veteran of the Titan Civil War,
Mm-hmm.
and uh is just this kind of broken piece of a man, who survived but just barely. And he came home and he did his best to raise a family and do all the things you're supposed to do. And he's just barely trucking along. And we early on, we kind of show this is a guy who knows, right? And we're almost telling the reader like, oh, you know, there's something coming. You don't know what it is, but by the time it gets to you, you'll wish you never knew about it, right? Like like it's a warning. And I wanted to run some stuff by you. And this is kind of where my head's at with my current draft. I haven't written this down yet, but I've been thinking about it the last couple of days.
That's what workshopping's for.
It's what workshopping is for. Because you have a lot of characters, right? There's a
Mhm.
lot of like guys he meets in here and there, whenever. And I kind of think I want him in a squad of people with a medic there, you know, and kind of have the same reoccurring characters throughout, which we kind of have that,
Mhm.
and, you know, but like early on, there's a medic named Mackenzie who straps him in, who he thinks is cute. And so I'm like, oh, there's another scene later on in the aid station. And I'm like, oh, we'll have Mackenzie there too. She doesn't really have to say anything, but it's kind of like continuity, right? Like, oh, Mackenzie went with them on the jump or whatever.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and kind of embed him in a squad more. But that's kind of where I'm going with that. We've got those first four episodes, sort of first four stories written,
Mhm.
and we're currently developing them. And I'm kind of taking, you know, I'm having a great time, kind of laser focusing on a character here, a character there, kind of expanding upon it. And at the end of the story, there's this kind of uh, uh, uh sort of like overall message of you know, how war is hell, basically. Now, that's sort of like the first four stories. Where do you see this going forward in the future?
Well, I mean, I actually started drafting a fifth story just this week, and the way I see it going forward is sort of like I mentioned before. It's just following Alex Santos, the main character's story through the frontier war, the ICA alliance, or whatever we want to call it.
Yeah,
Basically, and it would be pure. It would be episodic. It makes, or let me explain it in a way that makes more sense, because it's broken into sections. Like the section that we're working on now, with the four stories that are already written that we're editing, and then and maybe 4 to 6 more stories or something along those lines are part of section one, which is called Spacer Santos. And it's kind of like this is inspiration that I took from the Forever War. In fact, I don't know if you've ever read the Forever
I
War, but
have read the
it
Forever War.
it's broken into sections based on what rank Private Mandela was. You know, he was private, then he was a sergeant, then he was a lieutenant, then he was, I think, a major or something along
Yeah,
those. Yeah, every time he gets a promotion, there's a new section in the book. And that's just kind of what this would be. It would be Spacer Santos, Senior Spacer Santos, Sergeant Santos, whatever.
yeah.
And there might be some more nuance to it because it might not just be delineated by his promotions, but it's based. But each time there's a new section, there's maybe like a time jump, and it follows a new arc in his period of the war. So it'd be like, 2371, then 2373, 2375, and it skips ahead each time so that we see at least a snapshot of each stage of the war.
I like this because, and I'm glad we're having this conversation
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't really realize what the Frontier Wars was. I don't think. I thought the Frontier Wars was just the Third Titan War. So I was going to
Nope.
suggest maybe we call it like the Third Titan War or something. But if it's bigger than that, that makes a lot of sense. So we I look forward to developing Santos, and I think from just kind of a production standpoint as storytellers, this might be a better option for us moving forward,
Mm-hmm.
you know, where we tell kind of short stories that flesh out the world and, you know, kind of build out the Spacer Saga that way. Okay.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify just something on the note of the Frontier Wars, because the Frontier Wars at their heart and soul are kind of a metaphor for the world wars here on Earth, because you've got, and at least insofar as that they've got multiple theaters. Like, in World War II, which is without a doubt, the largest global conflict ever fought. Most people died ever in any conflict we know of anyway.
Sure.
Um, that sort of thing. In the Frontier Wars, it's the same way. In the first Frontier Wars, which there's a second one that takes place in a story that hasn't been published yet, so that's like in the vault. But in the Frontier Wars that we know of now, there's
So
multiple different theaters.
I got it. Just call it the Frontier War. And then
Okay.
that, because something about it was kind of like, I was like, it doesn't really ring
Mhm.
very well. Like, I'm like, I could see what you're going for, but I'm like, it also doesn't, there's just a little bit of a twist, or a little bit of
I
a
get what
tweak.
you're saying because the Draconist Wars do fit with that narrative because it's a bunch of little disconnected wars that are all under one umbrella. But the Frontier War is basically one big conflict between two titanic superpowers that has multiple
Yes.
theaters.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
Yeah.
So
If it's,
I'm gonna have to delete a lot of S's from the blog.
well, it's okay. Um, but yeah, because it just, it,
Yeah, because you could be sent to Titan, or you could be sent to Ganymede. You could, in theory, be sent to patrol around elsewhere in the Jovian or Saturn systems. You could be sent to patrol this asteroid belt. There's lots of theaters in the Frontier War,
yeah,
just
yeah.
like there's lots of theaters in World War II. You could be sent to northern Italy. You could be sent to eastern France. You could be sent to the island hopping campaign. You could be, on Navy ships going back and forth across the Atlantic.
There's, you know, there was a lot of different theaters in the global war on terror.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that really works. I think that fixes my issue with the name because
Mm.
I'm like, the name doesn't quite work, but if you just take off the S, for some reason, that sounds better.
Here's a thought I just had, and I think I've probably had this in the past, but it came back to me now. The odd thing about Spacer's history lore, or the lore of Spacer history, whatever you want to call it, is that the Global War on Terror analog comes before the World Wars analog, because the Draconist Wars are very much like the global, are very much our analog for the global war on terror. It's a big conflict that has lots of little conflicts that are sort of budding off from it, like the war in Iraq, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Yemen, the war in Libya, all these things. But they're all part of the global war on terror. Now, there's another name for the Draconist Wars, which is the war on Draconism, which is very much inspired by the war on terror. So I,
Yeah.
I, I cribbed that verbiage directly from the war on the global care. It's basically the solar war on Draconism, or whatever you would want to call it.
Yeah.
And of course, the Frontier War is, as we said, a big monolithic struggle between two superpowers with multiple theaters and fronts.
Yeah. And as your co-writer, I'm you do a much better job of seeing all of it from 30,000 feet than I do. So there's times when I'm like, well, I don't get it. But also I don't really need to. That's what I got you for. Um anyway, any final thoughts on During the Course of the Galaxy?
Yeah, I'm excited to see how it develops because, like you said, the cool thing about it is it's so much easier to write. Because if I, even writing, even just writing an individual chapter is
Yeah.
easier, or even writing individual stories even is easier than writing an individual chapter of what I usually write. Because when I usually write a chapter, it's anywhere from 8 to 12 pages. These are like 5 or 6 pages. So I can basically spit one of these out in an hour, a couple hours,
Yeah.
and we can work on it. And it continues to develop a story. Like you said, it's basically doing for the Spacer Saga narrative what the novellas have been doing for the narrative on a broader stroke, which is telling shorter stories than what some people might expect from sci-fi, but which advance the narrative of the overall universe.
Absolutely. And on that note, for the Blanket Fortress of Solitude, I am Derwin,
And I am Nick.
and we will see you next Monday morning at 0700, and I will call you back on Facebook.